There was a pivotal moment in time when people were courageous enough to say, "Excuse me? Come again?" When people were courageous enough to challenge the divine right and go after the monarchy and dissolve feudalism so that they can institute and install their own representative government that worked for them. These people would have been called insurrectionists, but it doesn't matter. It is everyone's right to abolish a government that does not work for them. But don't get me wrong, after these courageous people did what they did, they soon discovered something. Some people were talented and others were not. Yeah, by the time they overthrew the monarchy, they learned the lesson that most teenagers have to learn. You're on your own. Being on their own taught them a whole lot. It exposed a whole lot, especially disparities. Some liberals sank and others swam. There was a clear disparity in talent and skill. Today, we're going to talk about why liberals split and why factions exist. We're going to talk about the classical liberal, the liberal that endorses negative freedom, that keeps the government in the negative. But first, how about that intro?
What you know about my politics? Know about my politics.
All right, let's get the hard part out of the way. We're just going to define classical liberalism so no one judges me and accuses me of being biased. I'm just going to give it to you straight. I'm going to read it right out of the book. It says classical liberalism is a tradition within liberalism that seeks to maximize the realm of unconstrained individual action, typically by establishing a minimal state and a reliance on market economics. So your classical liberal is that guy or gal who reminds you of, I don't know, a little bit of Ron Swanson from Parks and Recreation. I like that guy. I'd drop the panties for that guy. Classical liberals are very different from modern liberal types. Remember, we've already established, baby, your modern liberal is positive freedom. They pretty much align with all the tenets that liberalism was built on. They like tolerance, justice, individualism, freedom, reason, but they have to grow the state to achieve those things. Your classical liberal wants to keep the state in the negative. So here's what you may already know about classical liberals. Though they, like all liberals, believe in the utility of government, they are actually quite aware of the dangers that the government embodies at all times. See, the government embodies a threat to most people with brains. All governments, to classical liberals, they are potential tyrannies, just waiting to tyrant. So before classical liberals vote on any policy, they're usually out here looking like Elon Musk, doing a whole bunch of mental gymnastics, baby, a whole bunch of mental math. You won't find the same temperament in the modern liberal space, in my opinion. You're gonna see more modern liberals going, yeah, give it to the government. Let them fix it.
Bruh.
This will make your classical liberal throw up in their mouth. The liberal position has always been, until very, very recently, that egoism plus power equals corruption. Power tends to corrupt, and corrupt power corrupts. Absolutely. Early liberals therefore upheld the principle of limited government. And just how can the government be limited or tamed, I hear you ask? Through a constitution, of course. So before we define what a constitution is, let me just give you guys the central idea of how the government should operate from a liberal's perspective. If there must be a government, it must be restrained by a document, by a constitution. Voters are to provide consent to allow a representative to represent them. And this consent is achieved by frequent elections. This is the character of a democratic process, folks, or a liberal democracy. The two are synonymous for some reason. This is a very particular form of democracy where there are external checks and balances, might I add. This is the part where I have to assert something that's often overlooked about democracies. And I know a lot of people are going to be mad, but I just have to assert something about what early liberals did for you. The ones that took on the monarchy, the ones that died, the ones that stood up and said, I know I don't have the kind of weapons or the protection you have, but I'm still not about to be your slave or serf. You're still not going to overtax me. I'm still about to show up and show out here in these streets. Your modern liberal, your classical liberal, each one of those factions descended from the kind of people who legit were about that life. Now, they endorsed democracy, good people, but did you know that democracy was commensurate upon one non-negotiable, what would you call it, condition? Democracy is consent, right? And consent does not exist if it can't be defended, to early liberals. So let me interpret that for you guys. Democracy is consent. Consent requires defense. Once you boil it down to the bones and make a nice soup, a true democracy does not exist where arms do not exist. A true democracy does not exist if the people are not prepared to defend their consent when it is abused. Not if, when. So here's the thing about democracy that I'm sure most people won't come across as they're getting their lectures in universities these days. Democracy is not the golden goose it is painted as. Democracy is summed up as mob rule. Democracy is the best of the worst systems, okay? It is a rule of the masses at the expense of wisdom and property. It offers that the will of the majority or the greatest number should prevail over the few. It's the tyranny of the many. Some smart person argued that the best defense of majoritarianism is a network of checks and balances that would make government responsive to minorities and safeguard the propertied from the propertyless. Now, we are living in the proof that the people who scream democracy from the mountaintops, they no longer function to meet the demands democracy demands. They celebrate a government that could abolish gun rights under the guise of gun control, even though democracy is pretty much conditional on people having guns. Some smart person out there is probably gonna go, Jazz, that don't make no sense, girl. Democracies exist all over the place, and people, they don't have guns. They don't have to worry about gun control. Let me put you on to some tea. Let me get you all the way together. You ready? The democracies you're bringing to mind are not true democracies. They are hybrids.
Oh shit!
There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it, baby. They're hybrids. If democracies exist where the people don't have arms or weaponry to become their own military, that's not a true democratic process. No democratic process is true unless consent can be defended. So early liberals were before their time, y'all. They made decisions based on how government should operate. They operated on what human nature is and will always be, not what human nature should be. So they made sure our democratic process wasn't without a constitution. And I'm damn happy about that. What is a written constitution? It's a single authoritative document that defines the duties, powers, and functions of government institutions and so constitutes higher law. What's so important to understand about a constitution is that it sits above a king, a queen, or a president. A constitution is the document that binds our rights, our natural rights from God. In case you're wondering why a document like this would need to exist, the classical liberal operated off of the idea that the government was a necessary evil, remember? They would always need to be checked. They would always need to be restrained. They believe this because here's some truth you can't escape from. All humans are corrupt. So let's go down the rabbit hole together. Human beings are flawed and corruptible. Yet government is necessary, a necessary evil. But if you send humans who are corruptible into an elite circle, they will inevitably corrupt. So the government is best which governs the least. This is what Thomas Jefferson told us all along. Side note to all of those people who are out there wondering if there is any document that's as important as the Constitution. The Bill of Rights is really freaking important. It's basically a book that provides legal definitions of the relationship between the individual and the state. But that's a different video for a different day. So why don't we just take this opportunity to bring some early liberals into the chat? These are the liberals, the earliest ones that shaped the thought of millions who came after them. So let's talk about Mr. John Locke and Thomas Jefferson, shall we? It's fair to say that John Locke and Thomas Jefferson influenced liberal ideology. They littered the liberal thought circle with ideas on rights and how to process them. A right is an entitlement to be treated or act in a certain way. For these two thinkers, rights are natural in that they are invested into human beings by God. This may be where the term inalienable comes into play. Something that is inalienable to you cannot be taken away by man or government. Now, these men may have agreed on some things, but they disagreed as well. For instance, Locke believed that life, liberty, and property were rights, while Jefferson had no interest in saying property was a right at all. Property was not God-given, according to Jefferson. So in his Declaration of Independence, he was careful to note life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It wasn't until you meet Thomas Hobbes that you saw a complete difference of opinion when it comes to rights. In contrast to Jefferson and Locke, Hobbes pretty much said,
I'm not trusting nobody to their own devices, so a repressive government is better than no government at all.
Yeah, he's the guy who you wouldn't invite to the cookout. Locke seems more reasonable on the subject. He argues that government should really only fight to protect natural rights. When these rights are protected, the government earns the respect of its people. And then the people, in turn, obey the government. And if the government crosses a line, the people have the right to what? Rebellion. Here are the three functions Locke believed the government should oversee. He believed they should oversee the maintaining of public order. He believed they should oversee defense against external attacks, of course, military. He believed that they should ensure social contracts are enforced. Those issues and responsibilities, that come with are really the responsibility of the individuals involved. As it applies to perspectives on democracy, liberals never cease to entertain. Liberals understand democracy in individualist terms as consent expressed through the ballot box, democracy being equated with regular and competitive elections. While democracy constrains abuses of power, it must always be conducted within a constitutional framework to prevent majoritarian tyranny. Now, here's a conservative perspective for you. Conservatives endorse liberal democratic rule, but with qualifications about the need to protect property and traditional institutions from the will of the many. I can't let y'all go without giving you guys a preview of anarchists and how they feel up in here. The anarchists endorse direct democracy and call for continuous popular participation and radical decentralization. Electoral and representative democracy is merely a facade that attempts to conceal elite domination and reconcile the masses to their oppressors and oppression. You can let that go in through one ear and out the other if you want, but I'm here to tell you something. This is America, and there are about 350 plus million people in this country, and every single one of us has a different perspective on democracy. This is all the reasons why I'm a secessionist. I have no business living amongst liberals. I mean, can you imagine how an anarchist must feel to live around me? It's not even fair. It's not close to fair. Why do we do this to each other? Here's the tea. Government is a perpetual contest of factions. All of these factions trying to all pursue their ends. It's a giant competition and contest, y'all. And politicians know this, but they play on our ignorance. And they do a good job. Government knows it was intended to empower factions who needed empowering, but they were really only meant to operate within restraints. This is where we pivot back to the Constitution. And I'm gonna take this moment to nominate myself as the person who makes it very clear who the enemies of the Constitution are, baby. Anytime you encounter somebody who's got beef with the Constitution, you better give them the people's eyebrow, because there's something wrong with them. It really doesn't even matter who wrote the Constitution, if they were atheist, if they were racist or bigoted. It doesn't matter. You just need to focus on never losing that document, or else you're toast. Burnt toast. The sum of competing interests groups was what the government was, is, will always be. And there needed to be a document in place that expected society to degenerate. A constitution. Doesn't that word sound nice?
Constitution.
I'm just putting that out there for people who make the claim that the Constitution is so antiquated, it's so outdated. Child, please. The Constitution is actually one of the most brilliant documents you'll ever have in your lifetime because it's timeless. And I'm gonna tell you why. The Constitution is timeless in that it sits above a president, queen, or king. It was written with consciousness that society would one day become diverse, so diverse that it would degenerate. So here's a side note. We're just gonna segue to the American political system. Just right now, y'all notice something about our system? It gridlocks all the time. You've got conservatives, you've got progressives, and everybody else. You only have a binary in this country. When you're fighting for something, that system gridlocks. And even if you pass laws, it has to go through court systems and survive challenges. It sucks, but at the same time, our system was designed to be this way because people knew that one day we get to a space and time where we become so ideologically incompatible, we have no business sharing a country.
Oh my God! Oh, geez.
But that's another video for another day. I believe that people like classical liberals, they'd be happy in a nation that was a constitutional republic versus a progressive democracy. Classical liberals operate off of 4 theories that have really shaped their pursuit to life, liberty, and happiness. Let's go over those 4 areas just right now. You have natural rights. We've already basically discussed that. You have utilitarianism, economic liberalism, and you have social Darwinism. So let's start with economic liberalism, because this is actually what I find the most interesting about classical liberals. We're going to start out by introducing ourselves to a man named Mr. Adam Smith, baby. He was one of the first to make powerful contributions to the debate about the desirable role of government. He was born into a time where the government had so much power, where they would consistently intervene on economic life. They always encouraged and restricted whatever imports there were and would be, and Adam Smith came along and he challenged that, and he argued on the principle that the economy works best when the government is left out. He was one of the first people to go, yeah. The thing is, I could solve my own problems if you weren't in my way. Believe it or not, a lot of people today, they still have that swagger, they still have that attitude. I believe it's merited. I'm one of those people. The economy was seen as a market to Smith, right? He believed the market should operate according to the wishes of free individuals. Freedom within the market means freedom of choice. Relationships within a market, employer and employee, buyer and seller, these are contractual. You make shitty products, you reap the consequence. No one should be forced to buy from you. So let's talk about utilitarianism. Early liberalism was not only built upon concepts of natural rights. Someone had to bring utilitarianism into this, and his name was Jeremy. It's always a Jeremy. His name was Jeremy Bentham, and he was one of the first people to call rights nonsense on stilts. I almost think that's a way to call something high or ridiculous, right? Instead of saying, you've been smoking that stuff. A more classy way to do it was, are you on stilts? Are you on stilts, man? He proposed what he believes was a more scientific and objective idea. Individuals are motivated by self-interest, Mr. Jeremy Bentham claims. That these interests are really driven by pleasure, happiness, the endeavor to avoid pain. These could be calculated in terms of utility. Utility is a principle that suggests that a moral rightness of an action, policy, or institution can be established by how it promotes happiness. People can deduce and discern what is moral based on how much pleasure an action produces. And then a principle was born behind this whole idea, right? The greatest happiness for the greatest number. What could possibly go wrong? The greatest happiness is flawed because it has majoritarian implications. It uses happiness as the greatest number to assume what is morally correct. And that's pretty much reminiscent in our democratic process, right? If 52% of people vote for something, then That just is what it is. But does that mean it's right? Absolutely not. It also leaves too many people to ask themselves what is good. And so here's what we must remember about liberalism, folks. It's a meta ideology. It wasn't really designed to define what is good for the individual. But let me go ahead and play devil's advocate, because I understand utility, right? I apply it in my everyday life, especially when it comes to the Constitution. Listen here, the framers of the Constitution were of course motivated by their own backgrounds and interests. Focusing too hard on who authored it and the age it was authored in is a way to emotionally manipulate people into wanting to get rid of the most important document that exists. Because that document is the only thing that keeps a government from stomping on you. The Constitution is more important than your birth certificate in a way. The Constitution is the only thing that exists above a sitting president. So honestly, there are times when it's appropriate to accept that the utility of an invention is greater than the flawed person who invented it. So keep that in mind whenever you see any political agent of any race working towards poisoning your mind against a document that's as important as the Constitution, especially Black nationalists. Not to pick on anybody. You already know. Your girl's, I'm a Negro woman, but I call it like I see it. Black people are taught to hate the Constitution because the people who drafted it were so racist and they were slave owners. If they were or were not, the answer is not ridding of the only document that restrains government behavior. That's ridiculous. Shrinking the government out of your life and creating your own constitution, which would probably make more sense than ridding of the only document that's restraining the government right now. But the Black community needs a leader that will offer them guidance. And because right about now, the Black community's voting patterns, it seems like they just vote for positive freedom. They consistently grow the government. And you would think that a community with a background such as theirs would constantly want to shrink the government. That's neither here nor there. Black people are not classically liberal. They are overwhelmingly Marxist. And on that note, we're going to talk about social Darwinism. I don't know if you guys have heard of Charles Darwin, but yeah, he developed a theory on species and how they evolve. He set out to explain the diversity of animals on Earth and proposed that some, not all, would evolve to become self-sufficient, while the others would devolve. Not all species are made equal. Some will prosper and some will die because Mother Nature decides which species mutates to become stronger or weaker via natural selection. By the end of the 19th century, these ideas extended beyond biology. And where did they extend to? They were applied to the human. They were applied to the political animal, the human political animal. Herbert Spencer is the dude that used the theory of natural selection to develop a social principle of survival of the fittest. So specifically, people were more likely to rise to the top or sink. And you're going to see a lot of this sentiment in the liberal space, in the classical liberal space. Social Darwinism. It has a lot to do with the dismissive attitude towards poverty and social equality. All of that stuff is chalked up to Darwinism in a way. Classical liberals have this swagger where they believe you have to be free to fall and rise and fall and rise and fall and rise. They want you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I don't have a problem with that, to be honest, but let me just say this. For those of you out there who are preaching about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, here's the thing. You need to make it very clear that when you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, it doesn't guarantee success. You only tell people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps because you know they're going to have a harder time if they grow the government. If they get the government involved, the government is going to keep them dependent. The government is never going to solve anyone's problems because if they did, they wouldn't have a job tomorrow. So when you tell people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, just be mindful. Be mindful. You need to let them know that this does not guarantee you success. This only guarantees that you won't be ruled over by some dude in Washington, D.C. who has a brain made of applesauce. Again, the classical liberal is more negative freedom oriented. We have some tensions within the liberal space, don't we? But we already knew that. Modern liberals and classical liberals are very different. So I'm going to go ahead and just take a quick look at this matrix right here. Classical liberalism endorses economic liberalism, egotistical individualism. They maximize utility. They endorse negative freedom. They believe in a minimal state, a free market economy. They have rights-based justice, where modern liberalism has justice as fairness. And I covered that already in my modern liberal video, where modern liberals kind of operate in a different way about justice. So, yeah. So classical liberals endorse strict meritocracy. They believe in individual responsibility, and they have a thing for safety net welfare. Go figure. So here's my 2 cents. To a classical liberal who endorses negative freedom, the state is always a necessary evil. The state is the night watchman. They are there to provide maintenance to what individuals have already established. They have a broadly positive view of society, which is a good thing. There are 2 realms the classical liberal peers through, right? They have the realm of freedom and the realm of coercion. Equilibrium can only be achieved if people are as free as possible. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to concede this right here. We don't have to pretend like I'm not black. We don't have to pretend like I don't have a certain melanin count. When we talk about how equilibrium can be achieved if people are as free as possible, there's someone out there who's going to ask, how can people be free to establish equilibrium when there's so much injustice going on? My friends, this is where I rise to the occasion. Freedom is the antidote to injustice. I'm going to go ahead and give you guys an example of something just right now. If in a society people are discriminated against, those people would have to make a deal with fate to be uncomfortable today, to be secure economically tomorrow, right? They would have to have the freedom to be nepotistic, to only do for people within their own tribe for however long it takes to become economically stable, to amass wealth. I'm trying to make a point, because I know I'm a black woman, and I know you see it. I know you see this melanin, baby. I want to say this right now. Forced integration is what I'm against. Forced integration and having your wealth confiscated is everything I'm against. And I'm going to tell you why. Because I came from people who were slaves, and their descendants had to pay into a system where they paid taxes, and those taxes went into institutions they weren't even allowed to enter because they were black. So let's face it, whenever I hear of integration and diversity, I'm not about that life, because I understand that the only person who benefits from that kind of rhetoric is the politician, and I have all the smoke for them. It's the politician that benefits from forcing a polis of 350 million people to integrate and work together. They work for a machine, these politicians do. They work for a machine that has a pretty bad military-industrial complex. The politician works for a machine that combines our collective GDP and prides itself on being a world power. Communities. Could you imagine if communities stopped this whole diversity business and became just slightly more nepotistic, where they cared for their own for a temporary amount of time? And I'll go as far as saying this, beautiful people. If there were 12 million children right now who were starving and hungry in America, and we crowdfunded a means for them to get food, you know who would step in and feel entitled to maybe 30 or 40% of that money? The government. Governments be like,
What money? You mean my money?
if they adopted free market systems and learned how to shrink government, they would be unstoppable. But here we are. We've been taught to grow government all our lives, especially if you've gone to public school. If they adopted free market systems and traded only with the communities they wanted to, we would see more peace in this country. Believe it or not. So I just described something that's a bit reminiscent of MLK and Malcolm X. Here's the real tea I'm about to give y'all. MLK had a dream. He wanted everybody to integrate. Now, if you are blessed enough to still have your grandparents and maybe your great-grandparents around, if you ask them who they sided with, were they MLK or Malcolm X? Here's some perspective that people don't often talk about. They hardly ever talk about the fact that, no, not all black people wanted to integrate. Why would we want to do that? Malcolm X wanted people to understand that they would be better off segregated from society. They needed their own churches. They needed their own banks. They needed all of this stuff. He believed that we could establish our own equilibrium. Every community could. Establish your own equilibrium. Do for yourselves. Keep the government out of the way. And why wouldn't he think this way? After you're removed from your own diaspora, this is probably the most natural way you could think. And here's just a little side note about MLK. And I know I'm about to make a lot of people mad, but he's not liked by everybody. Not every black person rocks with MLK because he came off as a puppet. You had a person like MLK come along and say, we could all live together peacefully. And yeah, a lot of black people said no. All I'm saying is it's not natural. It's not natural to be as diverse as we've become. It's not. Someone came along and forced it to be so. MLK couldn't really be trusted because no one understood why he was given the biggest platform. They understood that someone had to have given him that platform. It wasn't a black person. Someone gave him a national stage to go where he wasn't welcome. And the conspiratorial part of the black community, I see you guys. I know you guys know what I'm talking about now. Come on now. You know what I'm talking about. At the end of the day, y'all can fact check me all you want for missing context and whatever excuses you come up with. But none of your fact checks change any facts. MLK had a dream, but did it come true? Maybe. For some people. Ask his descendants who still march through the streets today, screaming Black Lives Matter. Feel how you feel about what I'm saying to you right now. Malcolm X would not have been out here growing the government. He would have shrunk the government and put it through a wood chipper. He would not have been out here having dinner with Barack Obama or LeBron James because they're progressives. Now, I'm not saying Malcolm X was a liberal by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm telling you, the man was all about shrinking government. He was for negative freedom. And with that being said, which team you got? Are you for positive freedom or negative freedom? And with that being said, you know it's time to booty shake, right?
What you know about my politics? Know about my politics.
Want to keep up with me? Follow me on Instagram and Rumble at Jasmine Contours.